How much is it costing Washington taxpayers to fight the Trump administration in court? That answer may surprise you. Joining us to discuss this is TJ Martinell with the Center Square's Enterprise and Investigation Unit. TJ, thanks for taking time with us. Interesting to think that taxpayers in Washington are on both sides of this, funding attorneys to go after each other in a taxpayer-funded courtroom.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of putting it. Is Washington state taxpayers are paying two ways. They're paying to sue the Trump administration through the Attorney General's office, and then they're also paying at the federal level to defend federal actions taken by Trump or elsewhere. So yeah, they are actually paying. They're paying twice on this.
Well, I would argue though, TJ, they're paying three times, right? They're paying the plaintiffs, they're paying the defendants, and they're paying the arbiters, the courts, the judges.
Right. Well, they're also going to be paying outside counsel. I think one thing to stress with this story is this only concerned billable hours within the Attorney General's office itself. So our state Attorney General's office has, as of last year, over 1,000 active contracts with hundreds of law firms, including the top 10 law firms in the state. I don't know how many of those contracts concern litigation against the Trump administration, but it's very likely that there's even more billable hours in a significant amount. And what's really interesting about this is that out of the 34,000 hours, 23,000 was in just a 6-month period. And so what we're seeing is a massive increase in the amount of work that's being done on these litigations.
It's quite a bit of money that's being used for these attorneys and for the courts and for the filing and the clerks and all of that. But give us a little bit more insight into what these hours are for and kind of break that out for us, right? I mean, 34,000 hours, it's hard for us to understand exactly what that equates to.
Well, it equates to almost 4 years worth of work, of billable work. And so a lot of the hours, we're talking thousands of hours, was on pre-litigation investigative work. So they were doing a lot of prep work for the litigation before they even filed the lawsuits. I mean, our current governor, the day after the presidential election in November of 2024, came out and said that they had been working on litigation in the event that President Trump got elected back into office. And so there was that work, and then there was the work leading up to his inauguration in January of 2025 last year. And so the moment he started issuing executive orders or making other decisions, the lawsuits started coming out. And now, we're seeing an unprecedented number of lawsuits filed by our state attorney general. Bob Ferguson, when he was our state attorney general during the Trump first term, I don't think he filed a lawsuit until the end of the first year. And our current Attorney General, Nick Brown, had filed many, many more. I believe there was over 30 by that same time frame, and it's now around almost 60 currently. So 60 lawsuits that's been filed, and it's been just over a year.
And this is just Washington. And again, Washington has joined with other states from across the country for 50 plus lawsuits, about a lawsuit a week against the Trump administration, where multi-states have joined together. So this just isn't a Washington state taxpayer issue. This is happening all across the country. Your story also went into just some of the other hundreds of lawsuits that there are against the Trump administration across the nation.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of them have not been resolved. They're still going through the courts, but the ones that have been closed, the Trump administration has won 30 of them, whereas the plaintiffs have won 19. And interesting, I think taxpayers may be paying actually 4 times, because a lot of these lawsuits has to do with federal funding. The majority of the lawsuits that our state attorney general has filed is to preserve access to federal funding that Trump has either tried to cut or he's tried to restrict how it's used. So this is spending that is trying to be reduced, that is being maintained, at least for right now in many cases. And so people are still going to be paying for these programs of all these different kinds. I mean, things that I didn't even know existed, programs that were being funded. So that's another way in which taxpayers, especially in states that are suing the Trump administration, are paying numerous times over.
Talking with TJ Martinell. He is an investigative reporter with the Center Square, and his latest reporting you can find at thecentersquare.com. I want to touch on what you mentioned there, right? I mean, you've got, of course, the plaintiffs that their taxpayers are paying for, the defense from the federal administration they're paying for, the courts are paying for, but as you rightly put out, fourth pot of money, taxpayer-funded programs. Just how much money is Washington looking to I guess you can characterize it as recapturing from
Yeah.
efficiency efforts the Trump administration is trying to make.
Yeah, we're talking billions and billions of dollars. I believe it was around $15 billion was for the loss in total of money that they're trying to preserve. And it's interesting that it's a very, I wouldn't say unusual, but it's just very intriguing that it's the states trying to prevent the government from reducing itself, the federal government, as far as spending is concerned. Now, when it comes to federal authority, that's a completely separate topic, and that the lawsuits on that has been very different. Suddenly the 10th Amendment comes back into play, but when it comes to federal funding, that has to do more with procedural litigation and all that kind of stuff. So it's a very interesting way that the states that are opposed to the Trump administration are using the legal system to prevent him from carrying out his agenda within the executive branch.
And again, it's not just necessarily federal resources that are being expended. It's also just other policy issues that seem to have really, shown the divide in American politics, right?
Yeah, and I think what this is also showing is a increase in the use of the legal system for the states to impose their will on the federal government in many regards, and telling them what they can and can't cut spending on at the federal level. So it's a very I don't think we've seen this level of litigation against a sitting president. I highly doubt that. I think it's fair to say it was not occurring during the Biden administration, but even going back to say the Bush administration or the Clinton administration or the Obama administration, one thing that would be interesting to look at is how many lawsuits were filed against them during their first or second terms, and what were those lawsuits over? Were they over constitutional issues, or was it over maintaining access to federal tax dollars?
How are we tracking this? What kinds of transparency methods are there to, look at these metrics and allow for taxpayers to kind of come to their own conclusion whether or not their attorney general's fighting in their best interest, or whether they think that that's a fool's errand, so to speak?
I think the difficulty is with the Attorney General's office, based on my conversations with their communications people, is that it's difficult to gauge how much it's cost them, because you can't use a flat rate for the billable hours. Depending on the attorney, their level of experience, they bill different hours. Maybe you have paralegals and staff that is not actually licensed to practice law working on stuff. The more clear picture we're going to get is from outside counsel, the invoices that they've sent to the Attorney General's office, because that's going to have an actual dollar amount on how much it costs them to work on this stuff. So we're going to get a clear picture in the future moving forward of how much it's cost, at least from outside counsel, to pursue these litigations.
Well, and that kind of helps me in a way respond to the scores of people here in Illinois that ask me on a regular basis, how much is it costing Illinois' attorney general to defend things like the state's gun law, right? I mean, that's a different case. It's not a government suing a government. It's individuals suing the government to get their rights back. But we hear all the time, TJ, that, taxpayers are having to pay to defend, in some perspective, their rights being taken away.
Yeah, that's actually another interesting thing to look at, is how many times are the state attorney generals having to defend laws that ultimately don't prevail in federal court, or it's pretty obvious that they're not legal or constitutional. And how much does it cost taxpayers to defend laws that end up getting overturned, but also laws that maybe get upheld, but at what cost to taxpayers, as opposed to passing laws and focusing on laws that are really not going to receive a whole lot of legal challenges.
Well, and then you also have the possibility of, if a law is struck down, then you have taxpayers having to foot the bill for any kind of attorney's fees going to the plaintiffs who brought the case.
Right. I think that's the interesting thing about the Attorney General's office of any state, is there's no consequences for them personally if they lose a lawsuit and they have to pay the fees for whoever is on the other side. It's taxpayers, and if they get fined, as our Attorney General's office has in the past, they get fined, and it's taxpayers who's paying for it. They're not fining the individual attorneys or the Attorney General. So they don't have a lot of incentive to not pursue litigation that may benefit them directly or benefit them politically, but doesn't benefit the taxpayers in their state.
Well, TJ, greatly appreciate your reporting. It's instructive for others who are looking to find out just how much it's costing taxpayers to have government battle government in court, and even what it may cost to go to court to defend what some say are unconstitutional laws. So greatly appreciate it. We'll talk again soon.